The sun still rose. You could see it climb above the horizon, right where it always had. But it no longer felt like the sun. Its light was weak, as if it were shining through dirty glass. Days passed. Then weeks. The sky stayed the same dull grey, not stormy, not dramatic. Just wrong. At noon, the world looked like evening. Shadows barely formed. Warmth never came. People waited for it to change. It didn't. Fires burned longer, cloaks stayed on even at midday. Breath showed in the air when it shouldn't have. Animals grew thin, crops stopped growing. Seeds pushed into the soil and came back as nothing. No one announced disaster. No messenger arrived. There was no warning, no sound, no single moment you could point to and say, "This is when it began." Life simply started failing. Food tasted the same, but there was less of it. The seasons lost their rhythm. Summer no longer behaved like summer. People looked to the sky for answers, and found only the same dim circle, day after day. You could not fight it. You could not run from it. You could not even understand it. All you knew was this: the sun was no longer doing its job. And when the sun falters, everything built beneath it begins to break. Before the sky dimmed, the world felt stable. People trusted the seasons. They had done so for generations. Spring meant planting. Summer meant growth. Autumn meant harvest. Winter was hard, but it was expected. Life followed patterns learned by watching the land, not by reading books. You knew when to sow by the warmth in the soil. You knew when to reap by the color of the grain. Most people never traveled far from where they were born. Their world was a village, a field, a road, a church. That was enough. Food did not come from markets or distant ships. It came from nearby land and familiar animals. Wheat, barley, rye. A bad harvest hurt. A good one kept everyone alive. Empires still existed. Kings still ruled. Taxes were still collected. But power rested on something simpler than armies. It rested on food continuing to appear every year. Granaries mattered more than gold. Ungsin mattered more than laws. People believed this order was natural, unchanging. As fixed as the rising sun, religion reinforced that belief. If the seasons held, it meant the world was in balance. If they failed, it meant sin, not systems. Priests prayed for rain or warmth. Farmers listened. Both believed the sky would respond. There was no idea of global climate, no understanding of atmosphere or distant forces. Weather was local, failure was personal. When a frost ruined a crop, you blamed chance or God. You did not blame the sky itself. Trade networks existed, but they were thin. Moving grain far was expensive and slow. Most regions survived on what they produced themselves. That meant resilience in good times and danger in bad ones. A single failed harvest could be endured. Two could be managed. More than that became something else entirely. Still, no one expected that kind of failure. The world had survived wars. It had survived plagues. It had survived weak rulers. It had never survived the sun, losing its strength. People woke each day assuming the rules still applied. They planted because planting was what you did. They waited because waiting had always worked. The sky looked strange, but strange skies had happened before. A cold summer could be explained. A bad year could be forgiven. What they did not see was that this was not a year. It was a shift. The foundations of their lives were built on a quiet agreement with nature. Provide effort, and the land provides food. Honor the seasons, and the seasons reward you. That agreement was breaking. Not with noise, not with fire, but with absence. No warmth, no reliable rain, no recovery. The world people trusted was still standing. The houses were there, the fields were there, but the system that made those things matter was starting to fail. And no one yet understood that the failure was not local, not temporary, and not negotiable. The first signs were easy to ignore. A harvest that came in late. Grain that looked thinner than it should. Fruit that never fully ripened. People explained it the way they always had. Too much rain. Not enough rain. Bad luck. No one thought the sky itself had changed. The cold crept in quietly. Morning stayed sharp longer than usual. Even at midday, the air never quite softened. Farmers adjusted. They planted again. They waited longer. They prayed harder. But the land stopped responding, seeds sprouted, and then stalled. Green fields turned dull before summer ended, grass for animals grew short and brittle. Livestock suffered first, thin cows gave less milk, sheep weakened. Horses lost strength. When animals failed, people noticed. Grain stores were opened earlier than planned. Winter supplies were touched. While it was still supposed to be warm, that was never a good sign. Still, the world tried to function. Taxes were demanded as usual. Rents were collected. Authorities assumed next season would fix everything. It always had before. What no one could see was that the failure was not moving like weather. It was not drifting from one region to another. It was everywhere at once. Reports began to travel. Different valleys, different kingdoms. The same story: cold summers, empty harvests, animals dying without disease. Merchants noticed roads growing quieter. Less surplus meant less trade. Less trade meant fewer goods moving at all. Communities that relied on exchange felt the strain quickly. Mountain regions, poor soils, places that survived by balance, not abundance. That balance tipped. People began to eat seed grain, a decision made only when hope was already thinning. You eat the future to survive the present. And once you do, there is no easy return. Religious explanations grew darker. This was no longer a small warning. It felt like punishment. But punishment for what? No king had fallen. No great war had broken out. No clear sin stood out. The silence was worse than anger. There was no enemy to face. No action to take. Just a growing sense that the world's rules were changing without asking permission. The sun still rose. The calendar still turned. But the invisible support beneath daily life was weakening. And with every failed harvest, the margin between survival and collapse grew thinner. Soon, even hope would become a scarce resource. By the second year, the collapse stopped pretending to be temporary. Summer arrived on the calendar, not in the air. Cold rain fell when warmth was expected. In some places, snow returned after planting had already begun. Fields failed in sequence, first the higher ground, then the lowlands. Grain never reached maturity, head stayed green, then rotted. What was harvested could not be stored. It spoiled too quickly. Hunger did not arrive as a sudden wave. It settled in, meals shrank, then disappeared. Families stretched food by boiling grass, bark, roots. Anything that could be swallowed was tried. Livestock were slaughtered early, before they collapsed on their own. That brought relief for weeks. Then the animals were gone. Children weakened first. The elderly followed. Bodies lost weight faster than anyone remembered seeing before. Faces hollowed, voices softened. Travelers carried the same news everywhere. Not stories, observations. This village has nothing left. That valley is empty. The road ahead is silent. Trade collapsed without drama. No caravans arrived because there was nothing worth carrying. No ships sailed inland routes because ports had nothing to offer. Coin lost meaning where food did not exist. In some regions, people fled. They walked toward rumors of better land. Most found only others doing the same. Movement spread hunger faster than any army. Authorities tried to hold order. They issued demands that could no longer be met. They punished failure as if it were disobedience. But punishment cannot create grain. As bodies weakened, disease followed, not great plagues. Small infections that would once have been survivable. A cut, a cough, a fever that did not pass. The dead accumulated slowly at first, then faster. Burial customs broke down. Not from panic, but exhaustion. When every household has someone dying, there are not enough hands. In cities, the situation turned sharper. They had always depended on the countryside. When food stopped arriving, density became a threat. People left in numbers that stripped neighborhoods bare. Those who stayed watched prices climb until they meant nothing. You could have silver and still starve. Religious spaces filled at first. Prayers grew longer. Processions became more frequent. Then those too thinned. Faith did not disappear. Energy did. Across continents, the same pattern unfolded without coordination. No message passed between them. No shared plan existed. Yet the collapse synchronized itself. Cold summers, failed harvests, hunger, weakness, death. This was not an invasion. No enemy crossed borders. No city burned. The world simply stopped producing enough to keep itself alive. People noticed the sky again, not with curiosity, with suspicion. The sun remained dim, unchanging, indifferent. Years passed like this, not one terrible moment, but many grinding ones. A bad year followed by another, then another. Children born into this world never knew normal seasons. They grew up thin, learning scarcity as a fact of life. Entire regions lost population without anyone recording it. No census marked the absence. No monument named the dead. The catastrophe left no single image. No ruins, no battlefield, only quieter roads, smaller settlements, fields reclaimed by weeds. Civilizations did not fall overnight. They thinned. Systems built on narrow margins could not survive long without recovery. Trade routes faded. Authority weakened. Connections snapped one by one, all because something far above the ground had changed. Something no one could see. Something no one could stop. The catastrophe was not loud. It was relentless. As hunger dragged on, people changed. Not all at once, not in the same way. At first, they tried to hold on to normal behavior, customs, obligations, rules. But hunger rewires priorities. When food is scarce, generosity becomes dangerous. Sharing means weakening yourself. Weakening yourself can mean death. Neighbors stopped visiting. Doors stayed closed. Villages grew quiet, even before they emptied. Suspicion replaced trust. If one household still had grain, others noticed. If someone's children looked healthier, people talked. Rumors spread faster than facts. Fear did not explode. It settled into daily life. People became careful with words, careful with movement, careful with strangers. Religion intensified, then fractured. Some prayed constantly. Others gave up entirely. A few believed the end had already arrived and acted like nothing mattered anymore. There was no shared explanation, only personal ones. Parents made choices they never imagined. Who eats first? Who eats less? Who might not eat at all? These decisions were quiet. They happened indoors. They were not recorded. Social bonds weakened under the weight of survival math. Marriage meant another mouth to feed. Children became a risk rather than a blessing. The future felt like an expense no one could afford. Violence did not surge everywhere. In many places, people were too weak. Instead, abandonment became common. The sick were left behind. The elderly stayed where they fell. Not from cruelty, but from limits. You cannot carry everyone when your own legs are failing. Authority lost meaning without force or food. Orders continued to be issued, but no one had the strength to follow them. Punishment became impossible. Compliance became irrelevant. Power structures hollowed out from the inside. Markets vanished. Money sat unused. Promises meant nothing without bread. People began to live day by day, sometimes hour by hour. Long-term thinking disappeared. Planning felt dishonest. When survival is uncertain, hope becomes exhausting. Children learned silence early. They learned not to ask for food. They learned to watch adults closely. Entire generations grew up inside this psychological compression. No celebrations, no surplus, no relief, just endurance. The most unsettling part was how ordinary it became. Cold summers, thin harvests, empty roads. The human mind adapts even to collapse. People stopped asking when it would end. They asked only how to get through tomorrow. The disaster did not create monsters. It created fatigue. A deep, persistent exhaustion that wore down empathy, ritual, and belief. By the time conditions slowly began to improve years later, much had already been lost. Not just lives, but trust, memory of abundance, the sense that the world was stable by default. Those things do not return quickly. Some never return at all. When the sky finally began to recover, it did not feel like victory. There was no clear morning when warmth suddenly returned, no announcement that the danger had passed. The cold loosened its grip slowly, almost politely. A summer arrived that felt slightly less hostile. Crops grew a little taller. Animals survived a little longer. For those still alive, survival had already rewritten everything. Fields that once fed villages now stood empty. Not because the land was dead, but because the people were gone. Entire farms had no heirs. Houses collapsed from neglect. Roads led to places that no longer existed. Recovery required labor. Labor required people. And there were fewer of them everywhere. Communities reorganized around scarcity, smaller households, simpler routines, lower expectations. People planted cautiously. They saved seed obsessively. They avoided risk. Memory of failure guided every choice. Trade returned slowly, but on different terms. Routes that once thrived never reopened. Others shifted, following where survivors clustered. Some regions recovered faster than others, those with better soil, those with rivers, those with luck. Many never fully recovered at all. Knowledge was lost quietly. Farming techniques, local experience, names of places. When elders died without passing on what they knew, it vanished. Children born after the worst years inherited a thinner world, not just in numbers, but in possibilities. There were fewer skills to learn, fewer stories of abundance, fewer examples of stability. Societies adapted downward. Smaller populations required less food. Less food meant smaller ambitions. Complex systems were replaced by simpler ones. This was not collapse as destruction. It was collapse as contraction. Power shifted without battles. Institutions weakened because they no longer served enough people to justify their weight. Some rulers disappeared from history without being overthrown. They simply lost relevance. Religion changed too. Not abandoned, but altered. Faith became quieter. Less about prosperity, more about endurance. People stopped expecting the world to reward them. They hoped only that it would not betray them again. Generations later, stories of the dark years remained. Not as precise memories, but as warnings. Cold summers, failed harvests, times when the sun could not be trusted. These stories shaped behavior. Long after the climate stabilized, caution became cultural. Risk felt irresponsible. Growth felt fragile. The world moved forward, but it did so carefully. The disaster did not end with a clear line. It faded, and in its wake, humanity learned something it would never fully forget. Survival was not guaranteed, even when the sun still rose. Years later, people began to understand the pattern. Even if they could not name the cause, they noticed that the disaster had not followed borders. It had not targeted enemies. It had not responded to power. Strong kingdoms suffered beside weak ones. Remote villages failed alongside cities. This told them something important. The collapse was not political. It was environmental. The trigger came from far above daily life. Beyond kings, beyond belief, the dimmed sun reduced heat across the planet. Less heat meant shorter growing seasons. Shorter seasons meant repeated harvest failure. Agriculture in this world had no buffer. There were no large reserves, no global trade to shift food at scale, no technology to compensate for cold. When temperature dropped even slightly, the system broke. This revealed a dangerous truth. Pre-modern societies looked stable, but they were balanced on narrow margins. 1 or 2 bad years could be absorbed. Several in a row could not. Population levels before the disaster had been high. Land was fully used. There was little spare capacity. The climate shock forced a correction. Population fell to match what the land could support under harsher conditions. This was not planned. It was enforced. The long-term consequences reshaped history. Trade networks weakened and reformed along new lines. Some routes disappeared forever. Others shifted towards safer climates. Political power fragmented. Large systems became harder to maintain with fewer people and less surplus. This period helped accelerate the transition from centralized empires towards smaller regional powers. It also changed how people thought about nature. Before, seasons were trusted. After, they were watched. Memory of climate instability lingered for generations. Communities favored caution over expansion, security over ambition. This disaster did not produce immediate innovation. It produced restraint. In some regions, technological progress slowed. In others, social structures simplified. Complex systems require energy, food, and confidence. All three had been shaken. What makes this event stand out is not its violence, but its silence. No explosions, no wars, just a shift in environmental conditions that human systems were not built to survive. It was one of the clearest examples of a truth that still applies. Civilizations do not collapse only from enemies or mistakes. They collapse when the environment. They depend on changes faster than they can adapt. The people of this era did not know the cause, but they lived with the consequences, and those consequences quietly redirected the course of history. Centuries later, the year itself faded from memory. People forgot the number. They did not forget the lesson. Stories remained of summers that failed, of skies that looked wrong, of hunger that arrived without enemies. Those stories were not told as history. They were told as warnings. The world felt solid until it didn't. The systems people trusted worked perfectly. Right up to the moment they stopped, nothing dramatic announced the change. No collapse you could point to, just a slow realization that nature had rewritten the rules. Today, we live inside systems just as complex, just as optimized, just as dependent on stability. We assume continuity because it has held so far. They did too. The people of that time never learned why the sun dimmed. They only learned what happens when it does. They survived, but their world became smaller, quieter, more careful. Not because they chose it, because they had to. The year the sun disappeared did not end civilization. It showed how thin the line beneath it really was.